Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies, a science fiction Saturday again, but I've decided I'm going to do fantasy rather than science fiction because I've got another one of my virtual movie festivals, and it's been suggested in the comments that I do fantasy movies. I've done a couple of science fiction ones, but some people wanted to see fantasy movies done as the next imaginary movie festival, so I sat down, I got out my pen and paper, I looked around the shelves and I found 12 movies that I think would make a really good film festival. So let's get started. I had to go with this movie first. It's for me the great fantasy movie of the 1940s. Tremendous. It was filmed in England and America because in England the Germans weren't very happy with them at the time and were dropping bombs on them, so they moved production to America. It's the wonderful Alexander Korda produced Thief of Baghdad with Sabu, John Justin, Rex Ingram. It's just one of the best fantasy movies ever. Yes, it is a cultural appropriation because of the Arabian Nights stuff, but it gives us a beautifully textured world and one of the great movie villains, Jafar, played by Conrad Veidt. His Jafar is really interesting and deeper than you would think he would be. He lusts after the princess, and he really wants to get some of that. And that lust, combined with his sorcerous magical abilities, makes him an incredibly creepy villain. And for me, it's probably my favourite Conrad Veidt role. Vision put this Blu-ray of the movie out a little while ago. Doesn't have much beside the trailers, but it's beautifully crisp. The special effects are wonderful. The production design is fantastic. The scenes that are set in Basra, a seaport, where you get all sorts of multicultural people sitting in the markets. It gives you an incredibly vivid feel for the time and place. The setting is beautifully evoked. Sabu is fantastic. John Justin is interesting as the prince, and Rex Ingram playing the genie is just marvelous. I love Rex Ingram's genie in this, particularly when he takes Sabu's little thief Abu to the top of the world to find the all-seeing eye in the forehead of an idol, where monkeys with bows and arrows guard the idol and there's a giant spider. It's just the best. Fantastic fantasy movie and incredibly rewatchable for me. So I thought I'd have to do another kind of Arabian Nights thing for the second one, and Imprint put this one out as a part of their Tales of Adventure Collection 1. It's a movie I really love, and I've got the debut movie poster for it. 1001 Nights, with Cornel Wilde, Phil Silvers, Evelyn Keyes, Adele Jurgens. It's just a lot of fun. It breaks the fourth wall. It's got comedy stuff in it. It's got songs. It's got swashbuckling heroes, villainous bad guys, and it's even got a Frank Sinatra reference in it. I just love this one for so many reasons. It looks good in that vivid, saturated Technicolor they had in the 1940s. Phil Silvers plays a thief who is kind of lost in time. He's a 1940s hepcat in an Arabian Nights movie. I just love that one, and I think it is crazily underrated. For the third movie, I got this weird one which was filmed in Germany. It's got an Argentinian-born star, and the villain is played by a Mexican actor. It's directed by Byron Haskin. It's Captain Sindbad, with Guy Williams, Pedro Armendariz, and Heidi Brühl as the princess. This has got some crazy special effects in it. It's the usual swashbuckling Sindbad kind of movie. It's not the Ray Harryhausen Sindbad, but it's still a very good Sindbad movie. It's got Abraham Sofia playing Kalgo, a wizard, and the special effects are really groovy in this. There's a giant armoured fist which fights Sindbad, which is all done as an enormous puppet, and I like that. There's some magic done by Kalgo the wizard, which is kind of cool. It's very much limited by the special effects technology at the time. It's still one of those Saturday morning swashbuckling movies that really lands for me. And so I thought I'd make that the third one in this particular movie festival. Then I decided to go to a place which is not too popular in the world at the moment, Russia, for a couple of Russian Fantastica movies. They came out in the early 21st century, the first decade, from I think it was 2004 and 2006. First one's Night Watch, Nocnoy Dozor, which is a crazy fantasy movie about conflicting tribes of magic users living in Moscow and having a battle for supremacy between them. Fantastic special effects, totally over the top. At times it gets cyberpunky, at times it gets very dark and grim. There's a bit of gore in there, but not too much. This is the extended version. There are a couple of versions. There's a dub version, which is much shorter because the American distributors cut various things out of it. But I'm always in favour of getting as long a version of any movie, particularly a foreign language film that's been fiddled with by American distributors, so that you can get the full feel of it. And if you don't get all of the cultural context and all of the jokes, it doesn't matter. You're going to get more of them than you would with a much shorter version. So there's Night Watch, and then there's the sequel, Day Watch, which again has a whole bunch of fantastic special effects that war between the dark and the light. It just looks different than fantasy films that came out of other places. Now, of course, it looks different than an Asian fantasy film or an American one or an English one. Different cultural background from which the movie makers draw their mythological substrate. Based on some novels, and it's very different than novels. These two make an interesting double feature. And again, it expands that fantasy film festival feel further than just the usual Anglophone movies that you would think of when you're thinking fantasy film festival. In fact, I did a bit of a AI search, and when I mentioned fantasy movies, the only things that brought up were Tolkien and J.K. Rowling. AI is not a threat to us yet, but Night Watch and Day Watch I really enjoy. And then I thought I'd go with some fantasy movies that are, for the most part, based on or around females, because I didn't want this to be an entire sausage party. I love this one. It's based on a Broadway play with the music written by Kurt Weill. Very underrated, this movie, and not many people talk about it when they talk about fantasy films. And it's got a killer cast too. One Touch of Venus with Ava Gardner, Robert Walker, Eve Arden's in there as well, Olga San Juan, Dick Haymes. It's about the statue of a goddess Venus, which Tom Conway, playing the owner of a large department store, decides to display in his department store, not knowing that it's actually the goddess Venus. Robert Walker is one of the employees at the department store, who, in a moment of drunken idiocy, kisses the statue and brings her to life.
Was it you who kissed me?
And the goddess Venus is played by Ava Gardner. It then becomes a screwball comedy, and a nice one too. I really like it. Some of the songs were retained from the original Broadway play. Eve Arden has a really nice comic turn as the assistant of Tom Conway's department store owner, and she gets some really nice arch lines. And Ava Gardner was never more beautiful than in this movie. It's just a charming little fantasy movie. Then I thought I'd go with the movie that was made the same year that Kim Novak and James Stewart made Vertigo, Bell, Book and Candle, about a coven of witches living in New York City. Kim Novak is one of the witches. Her brother's played by Jack Lemmon. Her aunt's played by Elsa Lanchester. Ernie Kovacs is in there as a guy who is investigating witchcraft. James Stewart is the guy who lives above her shop and who is kind of the Darren to her Samantha. The ending I don't particularly like, because she gives up her magic to be with the man, which sends a really crook signal to me. Kim Novak is wonderful in this, and she essays that kind of sexiness and vulnerability, a kind of reticence about being a witch, which I find very interesting. Jack Lemmon's a lot of fun in it. It's a beautiful fantasy movie, and I'm always stunned by the fact that James Stewart and Kim Novak made this movie in the same year they made the much darker and much more creepy Vertigo. I like it a lot. The next one's another Ava Gardner movie. Ava Gardner's other main fantasy movie, apart from Tamlin, which she made a number of years later, which Imprint put out a release of about 2 years ago. This one's kind of forgotten too. It's beautifully shot. It's wonderfully acted. Pandora and the Flying Dutchman from the early 1950s with Ava Gardner and James Mason, about a woman called Pandora who in Spain meets a charming sea captain played by James Mason, not knowing that he's actually the Flying Dutchman. It's a beautiful lyrical fantasy film. It's got a little bit of the same vibe of things like the French Beauty and the Beast and Orpheus. It's got that otherworldliness about it, which I really appreciate. I haven't watched this one in a few years, and I think I should again. It's a movie I really love, and the romanticism of it really lands well with the fantasy aspects as well. And I'm always surprised that this one isn't better known and isn't more highly regarded by people who know these things. But I really enjoy Pandora and the Flying Dutchman. Had to throw this one in because I'd be remiss not to. We all know it, we all love it. Big Trouble in Little China with Kurt Russell, Kim Cattrall's in there as well, James Hong. Truck driver meets Chinese magic. That's all you need to know. This movie is such a joy, and so silly and so beautifully done. There are some incredible practical special effects. There are some incredible puppet work in there. There's Chinese magic. There's all sorts of wonderful stuff in this. And I really enjoy it every time I watch it. I don't think that I would watch it in a double feature with something like The Thing. I think they're tonally very different. But there are other movies that you could pair with this one really well if you wanted to do a double feature. Something like, say, Zoo Warriors of the Magic Mountain, or even The Jitters, or Mr. Vampire. Any of those movies would sit well with Big Trouble in Little China, but I'm putting it into my fantasy film festival. The last three now. And for the third last one, I thought I'd do an AIP movie from the 1960s. In fact, both of these AIP movies, I had to throw these guys in. The three heroes of fantasy and horror films in the 1950s and 60s. Vincent Price, Peter Lorre, Boris Karloff. The Raven. The Raven is such fun. Script by Richard Matheson. Directed by Roger Corman. Music by Lance Baxter. Fantastic fantasy thing with a magical battle in it, which is done in a very kludgy, low budget but fun way. Vincent Price, Boris Karloff, Peter Lorre, all with their tongues firmly in their cheeks, just enjoying themselves, making a silly little horror film for the drive-in movie market. This version doesn't have any special features, but I just love it. Again, it's one of those Saturday afternoon movies which you can sit down, enjoy it with a beer and popcorn, and just have a lot of fun with. It's supposed to be horror, but there's nothing really scary in it. It's a cheeky little fantasy movie that you can just sit back and love. And I do. Second last one is a low-budget Bird-Eye Gordon joint with some interesting special effects. I think the special effects in this one work so incredibly well for the budget that I can't help but love it. Stars Basil Rathbone, Estelle Winwood, Gary Lockwood, Richard Keel, The Magic Sword, about a young man who's the son of a witch played by Estelle Winwood, who goes to rescue a princess from an evil wizard played by Basil Rathbone. This one is incredibly underrated. It plays like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign in some ways. Before Dungeons and Dragons was a thing. In fact, it may well have been one of the inspirations for Gary Gygax and the others making Dungeons and Dragons. I watched this one for the first time only a few years ago, and I was blown away by how adept it was. There's a battle with the dragon which works incredibly well, and the matching up of the human figures and the puppet dragon is done at a level that I really didn't expect from a movie like this. You can find that almost anywhere at the Magic Sword, but I recommend if you're into fantasy films and into your Dungeons and Dragons kind of fantasy films, this is one of the precursors that you really should give a bit of love to and enjoy, because you can't not enjoy that 1960s drive-in monster kid vibe, and this movie has it in spades. The last one I've got is a children's movie, because fantasy isn't just for grown-ups. It's not just for penthouse letters. This one I saw in the cinema when I was a kid. I'd seen the TV series, I loved it. I loved the movie even more. It looks great, and because we only had black and white TV at the time, this was the first time I saw this particular group of characters in colour, and that added to the experience for me. It's Sid and Marty Krofft's Pufnstuf, which is incredibly groovy. Now, Sid and Marty Krofft created H.R. Pufnstuf. They did Lidsville as well. They did Sigmund and the Sea Monsters. They did a whole bunch of these kind of almost tokusatsu kids shows for TV, and then they decided to make a movie of Pufnstuf. Of course, it's got Jack Wilde, Billy Hayes. It's got Martha Ray and Mama Cass in it, and Mama Cass's song in this is fantastic. It's groovy all over. It's just a joyous childhood memory for me. You probably won't land with kids these days, but anybody who grew up in the 60s and possibly the 70s who saw this is wired to love it. I just enjoy it every time I watch it. Even though Pufnstuf himself comes across as maybe the first gay mayor in an American movie, I still think it lands well. The special effects are as good as they need to be. The costumes for the different characters are a lot of fun. The set designs are great. It's got a very 60s psychedelic vibe, which, given the fact that Sid and Marty Krofft were a little bit fond of the reefer, I'm not surprised by. But lovely movie. I enjoy it beyond its qualities in any way. I've got the soundtrack album to this as well. I think I've got an HR Pufnstuf figure tucked away in the man cave somewhere as well. So this is the childhood sweet spot for me, and I wanted to acknowledge it in my fantasy film festival as the movie to cap off the 12. So what do you think of that lot? Would you add any? Would you subtract any? What kind of movies would you add to it? And please don't say Harry Potter or Tolkien, because they're so mainstream now that they're just boring for me. And also J.K. Rowling, being the kind of unsavory character that she is never going to get mentioned again on this channel. There's that interesting cutoff where people don't think past Tolkien and don't think past Harry Potter when they think fantasy films. But there's an immense wealth of fantasy films that come before that stuff, and from many, many cultures in our world. But let me know what you like about those movies, whether you'd add them to your list, and whether you'd show them in a movie festival. And give me some other things that I might not have thought of as well, because that's part of the fun of the comments to this channel, being told about things that I didn't previously know about. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a comment, leave an emoji if you can't think of a comment. You can support the channel by becoming a patron at patreon.com/terrytalksmovies. I've got a live stream coming on the Monday video this week, and I'm going to talk about a few movies I've seen, including a new action film that I've got feelings about both ways, and I wanted to discuss that as well. So until next time, watch some good movies, watch some fantasy films, get some Pufnstuf into you, and I'll catch you next time.